Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have part 2 of chapter 1 of Stardust. If you've seen the movie, we already know that the first half is completely different. There's obviously more details that the movie did not have. Okay. I'm going to show you takes both pages. It's the picture right before, I guess this is where the market, how the market looks. If you need to pause, obviously pause so you can take a look at the details of the market. Okay. The market was thronged. It was bustling with people. All the strangers who had come to Wall in the previous weeks were there, and many of the inhabitants of the town of Wall was well. Mr. Promise had set up a wine tent and was selling wines and pasties to the village folk, who were often tempted by the foods being sold by the folk from beyond the wall, but had been told by their grandparents who had got it from their grandparents that it was deeply, utterly wrong to eat fairy food, to eat fairy fruit, to drink fairy water, and to sip fairy wine. For every 9 years the folk from over the hill set up their stalls, and for a day and a night the meadow played host to fairy market, and there was for one day and one night in 9 years commerce between the nations. There were wonders for sale, and marvels and miracles. There were things undreamed of and objects unimagined. What need, Dustin wondered, could someone have of the storm-filled eggshells? He jingled his money in his pocket handkerchief and looked for something small and inexpensive with which to amuse Daisy. He heard a gentleman chimming in the air above the hubbub of the market, and this he walked towards. He passed all stall where 5 huge men were dancing to the music of lugubrious hurdy-gurdy, being played by the mournful-looking black bear. He passed a stall where the balding man in a brightly colored kimono was smashing china plates and tossing them into a burning bowl, from which colored smoke was pouring, calling out to the passerby. The chiming grew louder. The stall was deserted. It was covered with flowers, bluebells and foxgloves, and harebells and daffodils, but also with violets and lilies, with tiny crimson dog roses, pale snowdrops, blue forget-me-nots, and profusion of other flowers Dunstan would not name. Each flower was made of glass or crystal, spun or carved. He would not tell. They counterfeited life perfectly, and they gimmed and jingled like distant glass bells. "Hello," called Dustin. "Good morrow to you on this market day," said the stallholder, clambering down from the painted caravan behind the stall, and the smile widely with white teeth in a dusky face. She was one of the folk from beyond the wall. He could tell at once from her eyes and her ears, which were visible beneath her curly black hair. Her eyes were in deep violet, while her ears were the ears of a cat, perhaps gently curved and dusted with a fine dark fur. Dustin picked up a plant from the stall. "It's very lovely," he said. It was a violet, and it clinked and it jingled and sang as he held it, making a noise similar to that which you can get for yourself in by wetting your finger and rubbing it gently around the wine glass. "How much is it?" She shrugged, and delightful shrug it was. "The cost is never discussed at the onset," she told him. "It might be a great deal more than you are prepared to pay, and then you would leave and we would both be the poorer for it. Let us discuss the merchandise in a more general way." Dustin paused. The gentleman with the black silk top that passed by the stall. "There," he said, "my debt to you is settled, and my rent is paid in full." "So where do these flowers come from?" asked Dustin. "On the side of Mount Calamon. A grove of glass flowers grows. The journey there is perilous, and the journey back is more so." "And of what purpose are they?" "The use and function of these flowers is chiefly decorative and recreational. They bring pleasure. They can be given to a loved one as a token of admiration and affection, and the sound they make is pleasing to the ear. Also, they catch the light most delightfully." And she held the bluebell up to the light, and Dunstan could not but observe that the color of the sunlight glittering through the purple crystal was inferior in both hue and shade of her eyes. "I see," said Dustin. "They are also used in certain spells and cantrips, if Sir is a magician." Dunstan shook his head. There was he noticed something remarkable about the young lady. Even so, they are delightful things. The remarkable thing was a thin silver chain that ran from her young lady's wrist down to her ankle and into the tent. Dunstan remarked upon it. "The chain, it brings me to the stall. I am personal slave of the witch woman who owns the stall. She caught me many years ago and played by waterfalls in my father's lands, high in the mountains, luring me on and on in the form of pretty frog, always but a moment out of the reach until I had left my father's lands unwittingly, whereupon she resumed her true shape and popped me into a sack. And you were her slave forever." "Not forever." And at that, the fairy girl smiled. "I gain my freedom on the day of the moon loses her daughter. If that occurs in a week when 2 Mondays come together, I await it with patience, and in the meantime I do as I am bid. And also I dream. Will you buy a flower from me now, young master? My name is Dunstan, and an honest name it is too. Where are you, your pincers, Master Dunstan? Will you catch the devil by that nose?" "And what is your name?" asked Dunstan, blushing a deep red. "I have no name. I am a slave, and my name had to be taken from me. I answer to 'Hey you,' or to 'Girl,' or to 'Foolish Lantern,' or to many other imprecation. Dunstan noticed how the silken fabric of her robe pressed itself against her body. He was aware of elegant curves and of her violet eyes upon him, and he swallowed. Dunstan put his hand in his pocket and pulled out his handkerchief. He could no longer look at the woman. He tumbled out his money onto the counter. "Take enough for this," he said, picking a pure white snowdrop from the table. "We do not take money at this stall." She pushed the coins back toward him. "No. What will you take?" For by now he was quite agitated, and his only mission was to obtain a flower for Daisy Hemstock, to obtain his flower and to depart. For truth to tell, the young lady was making him exceedingly uncomfortable. "I could take the color of your hair," she said, "or all of your memories before you were 3 years of age. I could take the hearing from your left ear. Not all of it, just enough that you'd not enjoy music or appreciate the running of a river or the soughing of the wind." Dunstan shook his head. "Or a kiss from you. 1 kiss. Here on the cheek." "That I'll pay with goodwill," said Dunstan, and with that he leaned across the stall amid the twinkling jingling of the crystal flowers and planted a chaste kiss on her soft cheek. He smelled the scent of her then, intoxicating, magical. It filled the front of his head with, and his chest and his mind. "There now," she said, and she passed to him his snowdrop. He took it with hands that suddenly seemed to him to be huge and clumsy, and not at all small, in every wise perfect, like the hands of the fairy girl. "And I'll see you back here tonight, Dunstan Thorn. When the moon goes down, come here and hoot like a little owl. Can you do that?" He nodded and stumbled away from her. He did not need to ask how she knew his surname. She had taken it from him, along with a certain other things, such as his heart. When he had kissed her, the snowdrop chimed in his hand. "Why, Dunstan Thorn," said Daisy Hemstock, when he encountered her by Mr. Bromius' tent, sitting with her family, eating great brown sausages and drinking porter. "Whatever is the matter?" "I brought you a gift," he muttered, and thrust a chiming snowdrop toward her. It glinted in the afternoon sunlight. She took it from him, puzzled, with fingers with shiny and sausage grease. Impulsively, Dunstan leaned forward and in front of her mother and father and sister, in front of the Bridget Comfrey and Mr. Bromius and all. He kissed her on her fair cheek. The outcry was predictable, but Mr. Hemstock, who had not lived in the border of fairy and lands beyond for 57 years, and nothing, exclaimed, "Hush now. Look at his eyes. Can't you see the poor boy's dazed in his wits, dazed and confused? He's bespelled. I'll whacker you. Hoy, Tommy Forster, come here. Take young Dunstan Thorn back to his village and keep an eye on him. Let him sleep if he wishes, or talk if he talks, his needs." And Tommy walked Dunstan out of the market and back to the village of the wall. "There now, Daisy," said her mother, stroking her hair. "He's just a little elf-touched, that's all. No need to take on so." And she pulled a lace kerchief from her capacious bosom and dabbed at her daughter's cheeks. Daisy looked up at her and seized the handkerchief. nose upon it and sniffled into it, and Miss Hemstock observed with a certain perplexity that Daisy appeared to be smiling through her tears. "But Mother Dunstan kissed me," said Daisy Hemstock, and she fixed the crystal snowdrop at the front of her bonnet, where she gimmed and glistened. Mr. Hemstock and Dunstan's father found the stall where the crystal flowers were being sold, but the stall was being run by an elderly woman accompanied by an exotic and very beautiful bird, which was chained to its perch by a thin silver chain, and there was no reasoning with the old woman, for all her talk was of one of her price of her collection. "Let's go buy good for nothing." And that was what came in ingratitude, and in those sad modern times, and of today's servants. In the empty village, for who would be in the village when they could be at the market, Dunstan was taken into the seventh Magpie and given a wooden settle on which to sit. He rested his forehead on his hand and stared off into no one knows where, and from time to time sighed huge sighs like the wind. Tommy Forrester tried to talk to him. Now and then, "Old fellow, buck up. That's the ticket. Let's see a smile, eh? How's about something to eat then, or something to drink? No? My word, you do look queer, Dunstan, old fellow." By gaining no response of any kind, Tommy began to pine after the market himself, where even now he rubbed his tender jaw. The lovely Bridget would be being escorted by some huge and imposing gentleman with exotic clothes, and a little monkey that chattered, and having assured himself that his friend had, or so it seemed, no intention of leaving the empty inn, Tommy walked back through the village to the gap in the wall and walked back through it. By now the place was a hubbub, a wild place of puppet shows and of jugglers, of dancing animals and of horses for auction, and all kinds of things for sale or barter. Then at evening the different kind of people came out. There was a crier who cried news of as a modern newspaper prints headlines. "The master of Stormhold suffers a mysterious malady. The hill of fire has moved to the fastness of Dean. The squire of Garamon's only heir is transformed into a grunting pigwin," and would for a coin expand further of these people and places. The sun set and a huge spring moon appeared, a height already in the heavens. A chill breeze blew. Now the traders retreated into their tents, and the visitors to the market found themselves whispered at, invented to partake of numerous wonders, each available for a price. As the moon came low on the horizon, Dunstan Thorne walked quietly down the cobbled streets of the village wall. He passed many of the merrymaker, visitors or foreigners, although few enough of them observed him as he walked. He slipped through the gap of the wall. Thick it was, the wall, and Dunstan found himself wondering, as his father had before him, what would happen were he to walk along the top of the wall, through the gap, and into the meadows. And that night, for the first time in his life, Dunstan entertained thoughts of continuing on through the meadows, of crossing the stream and vanishing into the trees, far from the fields. We know he entertained these thoughts awkwardly, as a man entertains unexpected guests, and then he put them from him as he reached his objective, as a man apologizes to his guest, muttering something about a prior engagement with his hatter. The moon was setting. Dunstan raised his hands to his mouth and hooted. There was no response. The sky above was deep color, blue perhaps, or purple, not black, sprinkled with more stars than the mind could hold. He hooted once more. That, she told him severely. It is nothing like a little owl, a snowy owl. It could be a barn owl, even if my ears were stopped up with twigs. Perhaps I'd imagine it an eagle owl, but it's not a little owl. Dunstan shrugged and grinned a little foolishly. The fairy woman sat down beside him. She intoxicated him. He was breathing her, sensing her through the pores of his skin. She leaned close to him. Do you think you are under a spell, pretty Dunstan? I don't know. She laughed, and the sound was a clear rill bubbling over rocks and stones. You are under no spell, pretty boy. Pretty boy. She lay back in the grass and stared up at the sky. Your stars, she asked. What are they like? Dunstan lay back in the cool grass and stared up at the night sky. There was certainly something odd about the stars, perhaps more color. Perhaps these was something about the number of tiny stars. The constellation, something was strange and wonderful about the stars. But then they lay back to back, staring up at the sky. What do you want from life? Asked the fairy last. I don't know, he admitted. You, I think. I want my freedom, she said. Dunstan reached down to the silver chain that ran from her wrist to her ankle and off in the grass. He tugged on it. It was stronger than it looked. Cat's breath and fish scales and moonlight mixed with the silver. She told him, unbreakable until the terms of the spell are concluded. Oh, he moved back onto the grass. I should not mind it, for it is a long, long chain. But the knowledge of it irks me. I miss my father's land, and the witch woman is not the best of mistresses. And she was quiet. Dunstan leaned over toward her, reached a hand up toward her face, felt something wet and hot splash against her hand. Why are you crying? She said nothing. Dunstan pulled her toward him, then wiped ineffectually at her face with his big hand, and then he leaned into her sobbing face and, tentatively uncertain of whether or not he was doing the correct thing, given the circumstances, he kissed her, full on her burning lips. There was a moment of hesitation, and then her mouth opened against his, and her tongue slid into his mouth, and he was under a strange stars, utterly irrevocably lost. He had kissed before with the girls of the village. He had gone no further. His hands felt her small breast through the silk of her shirt, of her dress, touched the heart. She clung to him hard, as if she were drowning, fumbling with his shirt, with his breeches. She was so small. She was scared he would hurt her and break her. He did not. She wrinkled and writhed beneath him, gasping and kicking and guiding him with her hand. She placed 100 burning kisses on his face and chest, and then she was above him, he would have pulled. They lay together side by side. The fairy woman adjusted her silk robe and was once more decorously covered. Dunstan pulled his breeches back up with regret. He squeezed her hand in his. The sweat dried on his skin and felt chilled and lonely. And he could see her now, as the sky lined into a pre-dawn gray. Animals were stirring, horses stamped, birds began waking to sing the dawn in. And here and there across the market ground, those in the tents were beginning to rise and move. "Now get along with you," she said, and looked at him half regretfully, with eyes of color of the dawn sky. And she kissed him gently on the mouth, with lips that tasted of crushed blackberries. And she stood up and walked back into the gypsy caravan behind the stall. Dazed and alone, Dunstan walked through the market, feeling a great deal older than his 18 years. He returned to the cow byre, took off his boots, and slept until he woke when the sun was high in the sky. On the following day, the market finished, although Dunstan did not return to it, and the foreigner left the village and life in Wall returned to normal, which was perhaps slightly less normal than life in most villages, particularly when the wind was in the wrong direction, but was all things considered normal enough. 2 weeks after the market, Tommy Forrester proposed marriage to Bridget Comfrey, and she accepted. And the week after that, Mrs. Hemstock came to visit Mrs. Thorne of a morning. They took tea in the parlor. "It is a blessing about the Forrester boy," said Mr. Hemstock. That it is," said Mrs. Thorne. "Have another scone, my dear. Expect your Daisy shall be a bridesmaid." "I trust she shall, Mrs. Hemstock, if she should live so long." Mrs. Thorne looked up, alarmed. "Why, she's not ill, Mrs. Stock. Say it isn't so." "She does not eat, Mrs. Thorne. She wastes away. She drinks a little water from time to time. Oh my, last night I finally discovered the cause. It is your Dunstan." "Dunstan? He has not." "Oh, no, nothing like that. He has ignored her. She has not seen him for days and days. She has taken it into her head that he no longer cares for her. She holds that snow job he gave her in sobs." Mrs. Thorne measured out more tea from the jar into the pot, added hot water. "Truth to tell," she admitted, "we're a little concerned about Dunstan. Thorny and me. He's been mooning. That's the only word for it. His work isn't getting done. Thorny was saying that he needs some settling down, that boy. If he'd but settled down, by Thorny was saying, he'd settle all westward meadows on the land." Miss Hemstock nodded slowly. "Hemstock would certainly not be adverse to seeing our Daisy happy. Certain he'd settle a flock or our sheep on the girl." The Hemstock sheep was notoriously the finest for miles around, shaggy-coated and intelligent for sheep, with curling horns and sharp hoofs. And so it was settled that Dunstan Thorne was married in June to Daisy Hemstock, and if the grooms seemed a little distracted, well, the bride was as glowing and lovely as ever any bride has been. Behind them, their father discussed the plans for the farmhouse for the newlyweds they would have built in the western meadows, and their mothers agreed how lovely Daisy looked, and what a pity it was for Dunstan that Pity it was that Dunstan had stopped Daisy from wearing the snowdrop he had bought for her at the market at the end of April in her wedding dress. And it is there we will leave them in a falling flurry of rose petals, scarlet and pink and white, or almost. They lived in Dunstan's cottage while their little farmhouse was erected, and they were certainly happy enough. And the day-to-day business of raising sheep and herding sheep and shearing them and nursing them slowly took the faraway look from Dunstan's eye. First autumn came and winter, and it was at the end of February, when the world was cold and a bitter wind howled down the moors and through the leafless forest, when an icy rain fell from the leaden skies, continually drizzling showers in lambing season. At 6 in the evening, when the sun had set and the sky was dark, that a wicker basket was pushed through the gap of the wall. The guard on each side of the gap did not notice the basket at first. They were facing the wrong way, after all, and it was dark and wet, and they were busy stamping their ground and staring gloomily and longly at the lights of the village. And then a high, keen wail began. First they noticed the basket at their feet, then the content of the basket wrapped in oiled silk and woolen blankets, and red bawling face, screwed up little eyes and mouth open and vocal and hungry. And there was attached a baby's blanket with silver pin, a scrap of parchment upon which were written in elegant and slightly archaic handwriting the following words: Tristan Thorn. And that concludes chapter 1. Thank you guys so much for watching. I did have to omit certain things because it described them having sex, so I didn't want to do it because I didn't know who's watching the video, so I did have to omit a little bit, but that's that. Let's move on. And obviously, thank you guys so much for watching. Please guys, don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, comment, share, and hit the bell for notification, and follow me on Instagram, and I will talk to you in my next video. Bye guys.